guys, thanks so much for joining us this week for When I Grow Up. Today's guest is an assistant U.S. attorney. Her name is Alicia Forbes, and I'm so excited to hear what she does for a living day to day and what her life looks like basically as a lawyer. But much more than that, we're going to hear what it's like to work at this level of the United States law, I guess, right? Is that right, Alicia?
Yeah.
Alicia, thank you so much for joining us. Can you explain a little bit what an AUSA does?
Yes. So as an AUSA or an assistant U.S. attorney, I work for the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is a part of the United States Department of Justice. So I work for the federal government. And in particular, I work in the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office. So that means that I am a federal prosecutor. So I do the same thing that a district attorney, or some states call them state's attorneys, do at the state level, except we do that in federal court for criminal violations of federal law. And so I work in Pensacola, Florida, which is in the Northern District of Florida, which is the panhandle of Florida. Basically, our district covers the whole top skinny bit of Florida. And so we prosecute any violations of federal criminal law that occur within our district.
Wow, that is a lot for me to even grasp right now. But I should also mention, you guys, that Alicia is actually my cousin, which is awesome. I've looked up to Alicia my entire life, and I'm excited to have her here and learn more about what she does. So how did you even decide to be a lawyer in the first place? And is that so? I mean, I know there's a lot of different types of lawyers, right?
Yes.
And
so even within my office, like I said, I work. I'm a criminal AUSA, but there are other AUSAs that do other things even within my own office.
Okay. Like what? Like what do they do?
So we also have civil AUSAs and appellate AUSAs. So civil AUSAs represent the United States in civil matters in court. So either when the United States government gets sued, so that they're a defendant, or they will sue other people on behalf of the United States. So, for example, when the Department of Justice initiates suits against companies for having done civil infractions, they'll levy fines and things like that. And so that's sort of an example of when the United States will be a plaintiff and the United States Attorney's Office will represent the United States government in that matter. An example of a defensive suit is obviously the United States government employs a lot of people. So a lot of times those employees will file suit for employment discrimination, harassment, those sorts of things that employees of other companies would file claims, but in this instance, because their employer is the United States government, they sue the United States. And so the United States needs to have lawyers. And so the U.S. Attorney's Office is basically like the law firm that represents the United States government.
I see.
So that's one aspect. And then, as I said, we also have an appellate division. And as that sounds, those lawyers handle the appeals that come out of the criminal cases that I do or the civil cases that the civil lawyers do.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize there was a separate lawyer for appeals, too.
Yes, not every office has them, but most do. It's kind of, it goes district by district and office by office.
I see. So, I mean, I guess I want to hear your entire story to where you are today, because I feel like everyone would be really encouraged by it, because I know it. You know, I grew up listening to it and knowing that you switched from one thing to the next and kind of in the end decided that this is where the path that you wanted to take. But before we jump into that, you said you're a criminal lawyer then. Did you know you wanted to go into criminal law from the beginning, or?
From the beginning of law school, but I didn't know that I always wanted to be a lawyer.
Right.
I actually thought that was a pretty dumb idea when I was younger.
Yes, oh my goodness.
I had several people, and I guess maybe you should, listen to people who might know better than you. But when I was growing up, because I like to talk a lot and like to argue a lot, and I did well in school, and I liked reading, that I had several, teachers and things like that say like, oh, you should think about being a lawyer, or like Alicia would make a good lawyer. And, I enjoyed doing sort of like mock trial stuff we did in like middle school and high school.
So you did mock trial kind of stuff growing up.
Yeah, like in class and things like that. Okay. But I always thought that was just not something that interested me.
Right.
But that's just because I didn't really know what lawyers did. I just
Mhm.
sort of had this sort of vague notion. I was like, oh, that sounds like working at a law firm and wearing suits, and that
Mhm,
sounds
mhm,
terrible.
mhm.
So instead, I went to a small liberal arts school and majored in music.
Yes. Which you are
And
a
that's where I
great
got my.
musician. You are a great musician, and that's what I know about you when I was very little, right? When I was growing up. And so you did your degree, your undergraduate program, and you got your when you graduated, you had a degree in music, right?
Yes.
Okay,
So
and
I got a
then
Bachelor of Arts in musicology.
and so after that, then what happened?
Um, so while I love music and I still perform at church and things like that, and I love playing music. But one of the things I learned through the course of getting my major and doing various internships and things like that is that music stopped being fun for me and enjoyable when it became stressful, or when I sort of was put in a career type situation. Like, it's sort of in the course of my
Interesting.
internships, I got really stressed out. Or when I was in orchestra and it was a very high pressure situation, I was, I thought this isn't really fun anymore. And so I sort of thought, well, I don't know that I want to pursue a career in it if
Mm.
I stop getting enjoyment out of playing.
So
So
sorry just to back up a little bit. So you were saying you're getting stressed out in like those kind of high pressured situations. I am curious to know, as far as getting a degree in music, what careers does that lead to eventually? Do you
um, well, so I knew from the beginning that while I enjoyed playing music and I have, some degree of talent in it, I was nowhere near good enough to be a performance major. So I sort of knew that going in, which is why I majored in musicology, which is actually basically it's like music history and music theory. But
Okay.
still, in order to get that type of music degree, I still had to, play an instrument. I had to be in ensembles. I had to have lessons, and I still had to audition and play
Mm-hmm.
a primary instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I actually did try sort of various different things, because it's not always just, you become a professional musician and you play either in a band or orchestra. I mean, that is one route you can take, or become a solo artist. You can also teach, which I knew that I did not like doing. um, you can, but you can also get into sort of the administrative aspects, which I had tried some as well in undergrad. So, for example, I worked at the music library. That was one of the jobs I had during
Oh,
undergrad,
wow. I didn't even
and
know they had that. I'm very musically challenged people. So, yes, anyways, I didn't even know those things existed. Okay. What other
yes,
administrative things can you do?
um, and and so there was also did an internship working for an opera company, and so I wasn't
Oh.
performing, in the orchestra or on stage, even though I have experience doing that. But it was sort of working in the office, and so I worked helping out the music librarian, getting scores together and just working on programs and that sort of thing. Kind of like the behind the scenes
Uh-huh,
office
uh-huh,
stuff that has
uh-huh.
to happen. And while I overall enjoyed the experience, it wasn't, doing that is like what helped me realize that that's not what I wanted to do forever.
Oh man.
And for me, that was very important, was just trying new things, because I didn't know what I didn't like or what I did like
Mm.
until I actually did it. So the sort of internships and like summer jobs that I did in undergrad, and same thing in law school. Again, I think your original question before I sort of
No, that's okay. That's
went off
okay.
on this tangent was, if I knew that criminal law was what I wanted to do. And eventually, by the time I decided to go to law school and I entered law school, I did know, because I had tried, after I sort of was like, well, like music maybe not my sort of thing. I did this, we did a winter at the college I went to in undergrad, which was Oberlin College in Ohio. We
Hmm.
do a winter term. And so basically for the month of January, it's kind of like a mini semester that you have between your main semesters, where 3 of your 4 winter terms, you have to do some kind of project or take a class or do something to get your winter term credit. And so a lot of people do internships, or they'll, for one of my winter terms, I played in the pit orchestra of one of our winter term operas. So it's a very wide variety of things that you
Wow.
can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of them was there was an Oberlin grad that every winter term offered a bunch of internships at their law firm in New York City.
Oh
And so
my
I thought,
goodness.
I was
Okay.
like, that sounds kind of cool. I could live for a month in
Yeah.
New York City, and I have another cousin on my other side of the family who lived in Manhattan at the
Uh-huh.
time, and I could stay with her in her apartment in Queens. And so for like the month of January, I worked at a law firm and stayed with my cousin. And um, what I learned from that was that I did not. I learned what kinds of law I did not want to do
Oh, okay.
because that
Okay.
particular law firm did a lot of family law and social security law and kind of boring civil stuff.
Right.
But I sort of actually got to see what lawyers really did day to day,
Mm,
and watch, go to court with them
mm,
and, see what they do in the office. What they were doing interested me, even if the subject matter didn't. So
I
that sort
see.
of,
I see.
spending that month at that firm sort of piqued my interest. And that next summer, which was the summer between my junior and senior year of undergrad,
Okay.
I, I went, back home to Phoenix for the summer where my parents were living and got an internship with a criminal law firm. Because I thought, well, maybe if it's the subject matter, let me see if criminal law is something that's more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it was much more interesting. And that's how I sort of knew
Okay.
that was the subject matter I was interested in. And it also is what led me to take the LSATs and apply to law school and go to law school after I graduated with my music degree.
Oh, wow. So you kind of knew, though, like early on in your undergrad, which direction you were going to go post, like
Like by the
after
beginning of my senior
graduation.
year, like by
Okay.
the beginning of my senior year.
So it was
So
like
I don't know if
kind of
that's
late, but
early.
not too late because
Yes.
I mean, like what do people normally study if they are planning to go to law school from the start? Just pre-law or
Well, there isn't any requirement, obviously.
okay. Okay.
So you just have to have a bachelor's in something
I see. I
in
see.
order to apply for law school.
Okay.
From my experience, obviously, after meeting people at law school,
Uh-huh.
a large majority of them are political science
I
majors,
see.
economics majors, finance majors, business, sometimes like business administration. Those are sort of the
Mm-hmm,
most common ones.
hmm.
But you meet, I've met like engineering majors and, psychology majors and sociology majors and, history majors and English majors. And so, and
Okay.
obviously I was probably in like the smaller minority that did music, but I had a friend who was a theater major in undergrad. So you can kind of do anything, but a large, majority who sort of know they want to go on to law school, a lot of them will do political science
Okay.
or
Okay.
economics or something like that.
So I don't want to
Practical.
ask you if you like regret that, but it's like, do you feel like you were at some sort of disadvantage going into law school because of it?
No,
Okay. Okay, well
no,
that's good to know.
because they reteach you everything anyway.
Okay.
So as long as you're used to going to school,
Uh-huh.
I mean, there is sort of this myth that like law school is this like really hard thing,
Is
but
it
it's it's
not?
it's
Isn't
not.
it?
It's 3 more years of school. Like if you got through undergrad, if you got through college,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
oops, sorry, I think I
No,
just
you're
pulled out my
good. You're
headphone. Okay,
good.
if you got through college, you can get through law school. It's probably a little bit more reading, but it's the
Okay.
same thing. You go to class, you read,
Uh-huh.
you have to talk about what you read in class, you take tests.
Okay.
So it's I think that people try to make it seem harder than it was because to make themselves feel better.
No, but I
But it really is
mean,
just school. It's just 3 more years of school. It's a lot of school. I mean,
okay, yeah,
it's a
it is a
lot of
lot of school.
school.
That's a lot of school. I mean,
But
okay, so your LSATs though, when do most people take that before law, like going to law school, right? Before they graduate undergrad or
it depends on what people do. It's actually not very common that people go straight to law school from undergrad. So I did.
mm,
And I knew a couple of people at my law school who did, but we were definitely in the minority. A lot of people take a year or two to work,
mhm, mhm.
or they'll do another, some people go to business school like and get some other, a
Right,
master's degree or
right.
something before they go to law school. But most people work for, 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years before they go to law school.
I
So
see.
from what I recall, most of those people didn't, some of them took their LSATs kind of knowing that they were going to eventually go to law school. So they took them while they were still in school.
Uh,
But some people just, while they were working, they studied for them and took them.
do those scores
Um,
not expire? if you take
They
them,
probably do. I don't
right?
really remember now.
I know it's been a little bit of time.
Yes.
But do you happen to remember if they were like challenging per se, like the LSATs themselves? Is it split up into sections similar to the SAT
Yes,
or
it's
okay.
similar to the SAT in that it is kind of a typical standardized test. There are sections.
Okay.
One of them is reading comprehension, so that part looks almost exactly like the SATs. Like you have to read a
Mhm.
thing and then answer multiple choice questions. But the whole thing is multiple choice. It is a standardized test. So um, from what I've seen and been told, it doesn't seem to really matter whether you take it while you're still in school or not, because it's still a thing that you have to. It's not based on sort of knowledge. You have to
Okay.
just prepare for you're still going to have to look at how it's set up and take practice tests and study, but it's not based on stuff you learned in school. It's reading comprehension, it's logic puzzles, it's that sort of
Okay.
thing.
Okay. 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 So let's fast forward a little bit, past the LSATs, past law school. You graduated law school now. I know there's a test that you have to take again, right, to be a lawyer. What is that
Yes,
called? The boards? Is that correct?
the bar exam.
Bar. What are the boards? Medical school?
I think that's for medical. Yeah.
I should be more informed when I do these interviews. Sorry, y'all. But the bar exam
Yes.
itself. Now, from what I hear from other lawyers, I mean, that was challenging. You really have to study for that, don't you?
Yes. The bar exam is in fact pretty terrible.
Yeah.
So like for me, law school it itself wasn't that hard or that much harder than school, but the bar exam is like the worst test you will ever take.
Okay.
Just because it's a lot of information, it is very long. It is 2 straight days, 8 hours, and then depending on which state you take it in, sometimes it's 3 straight days of 8 hours of
I'm sorry,
testing.
2 straight days?
Yes, 8 hours each.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad that our lawyers are knowledgeable and they have to take this test, I guess. I mean, like, is it memorization or is it
Basically, I
okay?
mean, it is obviously trying to test as well, your ability to apply the things that you've memorized to certain fact patterns and situations, but a lot of it is just rote memorization.
Okay.
And what makes it hard is that the bar exam, depending on because every state has their own bar exam, so each state does it a little bit differently. In Colorado, where I took the bar exam, they do what's called the multi-state bar exam. So there's some states that have kind of taken a standardized version of the bar exam, and for but and because it's a multi-state bar exam, it's not any particular state's law. It's sort of this like made up bar law. Like it's a law that you learn
Oh,
just so that you can take the bar exam. That's like not
okay.
applicable anywhere else. Isn't real based on real statutes or law or anything. So it really
Interesting.
is. You have to cram a bunch of information in your brain that has nothing to do or very little to do with what you just spent 3 years studying in law school about what the law actually
Interesting.
is, and you sort of have to just be
Interesting.
able to memorize this fake law to then apply, because it's sort of meant to be a more generalized exam that isn't specific to that state.
Okay. Okay. Um, that's crazy. So you pass this bar exam. I mean, I'm just curious. If you fail, do you get it? Can you take it again? Or
Yes. So
okay.
I was lucky enough that I passed it the first time, and I said, never, I'm gonna, you know,
Put this behind
I
me.
had
Yeah.
said, I'm never taking a bar exam again. God doesn't want me to be a lawyer. If I
Yeah.
don't pass it the first time, that means I'm doing something else with my life. Um, but I've had friends and it is normal, perfectly normal for people not to pass the
Uh-huh.
first time or
Uh-huh.
second time. Friends who had to take it several times, and that
Oh
just
my
it,
gosh.
it
That
stinks and it's expensive. So you try really hard not to do that.
right,
But
right.
yes, it's not. It's a pass fail. So either you pass it or you don't. So it's not sort of like the SATs where like the more time you take it, they average your scores and weird things that other standardized tests do. You just need to pass it. So
Okay. Oh
there are
man.
people who take it multiple times.
Okay, so you passed this test, this crazy, insane 2-day test. And now what do you do? What are you doing? You're looking for a job or
Yes.
okay.
Trying to find a job.
Okay, so how did that happen for you?
So immediately after I passed the bar, The first job that I did was I worked for a judge, which is sort of a typical thing to do straight out of law school.
Okay.
I worked for a state court judge in Denver,
Mm-hmm.
Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
who actually had been one of my adjunct professors in law school. So that's sort of how I
Oh, okay.
got it. Is he had been one of my trial practice
I
professors.
see. So is that common? Like, I guess it's good to know people, right? When you're
Yes,
looking
that's
for a
very,
job.
as I think with many professions.
Yes, I
Um,
agree.
but and so lawyering is no exception. That networking. They really impress that upon you while you're going through law school.
I see.
Is they try very hard to get you networked into the legal profession
Okay.
there, to help you with that once you graduate, because that is the way that you get
Yeah.
jobs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you worked for this judge.
Yes. And then I worked for, but that was, that's sort of a temporary, assignment,
Mm-hmm.
working as a law clerk for a judge. And then I worked for a private law firm doing criminal defense, even though I knew coming out of law school that I wanted to work as a prosecutor. But I also just needed a job. So at least doing criminal law, it was still experience and skills that I could use while I was applying to work at various different states' attorneys' offices. And so after working at a criminal defense firm for a while, I got laid off because this was 2010. Yeah, so I
Okay.
graduated law school in 2009,
Okay.
which was just after the Great Recession. And
Yes.
so
In
nobody was,
2000.
there were very few lawyers that were getting hired around that time, and a lot of lawyers getting laid off from
Mm,
their big firm jobs as well. So it was hard for a lot of people that I came out of law school with, just during that particular time, to get jobs. Um, and so after working for a firm doing contract work, so meaning like as an independent contractor, so I was just doing some hourly work for them,
okay, I
doing
see.
document review and things like that.
Okay.
I got a job with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the way I got my job with the U.S. Attorney's Office is that I was appointed as a term limited, what they call a special assistant United States attorney. And basically by special, they just mean you work for free.
Oh.
So uncompensated. So it was kind of a glorified internship, but I was sworn in as as an actual, a special assistant United States attorney. And I otherwise had the duties of and power of any other assistant United States attorney. I was just only limited to a year term, and I was not getting paid.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I just feel like, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong. For me, I would think that that job in itself, to get a year experience, even if you weren't getting paid, would be a really great one, a great experience, and really, I mean, I would imagine there's a small pool of people that get chosen to do this, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, at the time it wasn't, because, so again, this was 2000, late 2010 by
Uh-huh.
this time. And so, still under the effects of the recession, the federal government was under a hiring freeze. So this was sort of the only
Oh,
way. They sort of came up with this way as kind of, a way for them to get positions filled that they wouldn't otherwise, be allowed to. And at the same time, it's like, exactly like you said, like, for us new lawyers coming out, it's like, well, the choices are to be unemployed or, and not get
right,
money, get experience and not get money. And so,
right, right.
obviously the latter is better. And like I had told you, I knew that I wanted to work as a prosecutor. And so even though it was this sort of crazy thing to move from Colorado, where I'd been, living for the past 5 years, and where I was, barred to practice, like where I had my bar license, to move to Florida, where I'd never lived before. I had never been to Pensacola before. I had only ever heard of it because there was a show in like the 90s that was called Pensacola Wings of Gold, the naval aviators there. And, but, and to work, to move across the country for a job that wasn't going to pay me. But, I figured that at the end of the year term, if it didn't lead to, a job, at least I would have, that year's experience, and that would hopefully help me get to where I wanted to
Right,
be.
right, right.
Thankfully, because, I came here, really loved the office, really loved what I was doing, and my office was able to get an exception to the hiring freeze because that was still going on at the time, but they were able to, hire me on as a permanent, paid position
Wow.
about 10 months to my 1 year term. So that was in 2012. And so I've been
What
working
did
in
you
that
do?
position ever
You must have
since.
been amazing for them to get an exception for you. That's awesome. I didn't even know
So,
that. In my family, our family is a different breed. It's a different breed of people. So how Alicia and I are related is our dads are brothers, and just all my cousins, they are just incredible. They're doing incredible things, and they're super smart. So
but they're
I'm
all engineers.
Oh, yes,
Our
but
entire family
yeah, our
are
entire
engineers.
family are
only
engineers.
Blair and I are the only ones who are not engineers.
And I just shine in being different than all of them, 'cause, but anyways, I like to think that I'm a different kind of smart. I'm, but I did not excel as much as I wanted to in school. However, I didn't do poorly, but I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I definitely didn't have the motivation like Alicia does. So you're saying that throughout your time there, you really thrived, it sounds like, in that 10 months before you got hired, right?
I would like to think I did.
No,
I
I'm
tried very
sure.
hard to and to learn as much as I possibly could. And basically, I was willing to do anything, anything that needed to be done.
Yeah, I'm sure they
Um,
love that attitude about you too. Um, okay, so for people that just are completely clueless and ignorant, maybe even people like myself, could you kind of explain briefly the difference between a prosecutor and a defensive lawyer?
yes. So a prosecutor at whatever state or whatever level they're at, there are prosecutors at the city level, at the state level, county level, federal level. But all prosecutors are basically the ones that charge crimes. So when a crime happens and a police officer or some other law enforcement agency investigates or makes the arrest, the prosecutor is the one that decides what crime was committed and what crime that defendant should be charged with and what the
Okay.
evidence shows. And then the prosecutor is then responsible for proving that in court beyond a reasonable
Mhm.
doubt
Okay.
at whatever level of court they work for. So that's the prosecution side.
Okay.
So the defense side is a defense attorney is the one that represents the defendant who has been charged with the crime.
Okay.
So there are public defenders who do work for the court and the government for defendants that can't afford lawyers. They can
Okay.
get appointed to represent the defendant because under the Constitution, the defendant has a right to be represented by an attorney when they're charged with a crime. So if they can't afford one, the court will provide it to them. But there's also plenty of defense attorneys who work for a firm or for themselves who will get hired or what's called retained by
Mhm.
defendants because the defendants also have the right to choose whatever kind of lawyer they want to represent them.
I see. Okay. So those court-appointed defensive attorneys,
Defense attorneys.
defense attorneys, those court-appointed defense attorneys, are they like, do they most likely work for another firm or do they work for the United States?
No, they'll work. So in our case, we have they work for the federal defender's office. So it's a special office.
Oh,
They only take cases that are appointed by a federal court. In similarly at the state level, whether you have a district attorney's office or state attorney's office who are the prosecutors, they'll have a public defender's office, and they only take cases. Now, a lot of times because the public defender's office tends to be very overworked and
mhm,
underpaid,
mhm,
they will do what's called appointing cases. And
mhm.
so they will ask other attorneys who are private attorneys who do work for firms or work, for their own law firm
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
either in solo practice or as part of another firm to take on some of their cases. And so then they'll get appointed by the court. So in that instance, they do work for other firms and do other kinds of cases, but they just get appointed in that case for that one defendant to represent them.
I
And,
see.
but basically, they're kind of working on contract with the
Okay.
public defender's office. But the ones who actually work for the public defender's or the federal defender's office themselves, they don't work for another firm. That's their job 100% of the time.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. So what made you want to be a prosecutor and not a defense attorney?
Um, I had having worked on the defense side before, not only as I talked about the internship I did between my junior and senior year of undergrad, I worked for a firm that did criminal defense. Also during law school, I did what's called a clinic. And so for a lot of law schools have this program where basically it's kind of like a mini firm. So
Okay.
they take students who are in law school, and in your third year in Colorado, and a lot of states are very similar, as long as you're supervised by a licensed attorney and you're attending law school, you basically can be licensed to practice under the supervision of that attorney. So you can actually appear in court and do certain things. And so I did the criminal clinic at my law school, which did criminal defense. So basically, they took on cases that it's sort of in the same way that the public defender's office either didn't have time to take or couldn't take because it didn't meet their thresholds. And people who were sort of willing to have like students who didn't really know what they were doing, be their attorneys, they wouldn't have to pay though. So they were willing to do that.
Yeah.
So I got to handle, real cases and appear in court on behalf of clients, talk with clients, obviously under the supervision of our, clinic professors who are licensed attorneys. So I got that opportunity, as well as I got to intern with the Denver District Attorney's Office, and again under the Colorado, what was called the Student Practice Act, because I was a third-year law student under the supervision of the other DAs, I could appear in court and do trials and things like that.
Okay.
So having tried both sides, I liked doing prosecution a lot better, not necessarily from like a moral standpoint or anything like that, but what I really liked about prosecution was that you didn't have a client that you were beholden to. So a lot of lawyers, as you said, my type of law is just one little, corner of what lawyers do. But for the most part, whatever you do in law, you have a client. You're advocating on behalf of someone. And even, technically as U.S. attorneys, our client is the United States.
Okay.
So we still have a client. It's just not a person. We represent the government.
Right.
And but all lawyers are representatives of someone else or something else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I found that as a criminal defense attorney, your obligation, and as it should be, is to your client, is to the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have certain ethical and professional obligations as a result of them being your client. One of which is you have to do what the client wants to do, even if it's what you don't think is the best thing.
Oh man,
you
that
have a right.
Sounds
You have a
stressful.
Right. You have to advise them, obviously, of what you think the best thing should be to do, and you give them your best advice. But obviously, if they want you to do something else, you do what they tell you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way it is. On the civil side, if you work for a corporation or work or a client hires you to file a suit or whatever, again, it's the same sort of thing.
Right.
Whereas when you're a prosecutor, yes, you have a client, that's the government, but really in the end, it's up to you to do what you think is best and what you think is just and what you think is right.
Right.
And that's your job. Your job is to do the thing that's right and just,
mm-hmm.
And to seek the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked that part of it, is having that discretion and that freedom, sort of almost. Obviously you're constrained by what the law is and what the facts are and policies and all sorts of other things that can get into it, but in the end I just really liked that doing the right thing and doing your job was the same thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much to think about in just even making that decision, but I think you're right, like having to defend somebody knowing that they are your priority, it sounds incredibly stressful.
Yes. And it's very hard, and it's very important. And, so a lot of times, people joke, especially in this profession, because law is at least the legal system in our country is an adversarial system. It's us versus them.
Right.
So, they joke like, oh, we're on the light side, the defense is on the dark side, because
Right. Right.
they're the ones committing
Right. Right.
crimes and the things like that.
Right.
But I never viewed it that way when I very much valued the experience I got working criminal defense,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like a lot of career prosecutors who always knew from the beginning that they wanted to be prosecutors, and they never ever worked doing defense, having to represent a criminal defendant, don't have that same perspective. But it's hard, which is part of why I didn't want to do it. It's very
Yeah.
hard to sort of separate yourself,
Yeah.
right, as to what you want to do and what your obligation is. But it's very important because obviously, as I said, under our Constitution, they have the right to have counsel, help them and defend them and make sure that the government is respecting their rights, and that the government is doing the right thing. And so that is a very important job. It's just a job that I didn't particularly enjoy and didn't
Oh,
think I was
right.
very good
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
So,
Oh man, I mean, I'm getting kind of carried away here. I'm like thinking about all of that too, because like me personally, just who I am, if I were to ever go in that direction, or if I had ever decided to do that, I feel like it would be hard to detach myself emotionally to certain cases. Do you ever find yourself as a prosecutor? Like, have you ever experienced an emotional type of connection to something?
um, yes, I definitely think that happens. Um, I I definitely get very passionate about certain sorts of cases.
Oh, that's good. I like
um,
passion.
so, and I mean, in general, I am very passionate about just the work we do
Hmm.
on the whole, which is part of what I love about my job. But
Mhm.
in particular, being a federal prosecutor, there are certain perks that come with working for the United States government
Mhm.
versus working for a county prosecutor's office
Okay.
or a state prosecutor's office, or a municipal prosecutor's office, in that we have more money. So,
Okay. Yes.
um, so more money and more resources. So we have more resources and time to choose the kind of cases that we want to actually bring, and the kind of cases that we
I
investigate.
see.
And we also just have a smaller pool of jurisdiction, if that makes sense. There are less federal laws than there are state laws. So there's only certain things that are federal crimes.
Oh, I
And
guess
everything
so. I
else goes
never thought of it
to
like that, but
right.
yeah.
Everything else goes to the state to enforce. And
Okay.
so, because we are, thankfully not as overworked with the amount of the amount of cases that are out there, and knowing that the states are doing their jobs in prosecuting, the burglaries and thefts and sort of day to day things that are DUIs and all the other things that are happening. Um, we can use our resources to prosecute sort of the bigger fish. Is sort of typically the way it's seen, is that when you're making a Fed case out of something, it's because it's a bigger crime. So we
Mhm.
do the larger frauds, the larger drug cases, immigration cases, and things that cross state lines that other local law enforcement agencies can't handle. And so when we're looking at the bigger cases, they're sort of the more, I don't want to say that they're more important cases, but
But they're
you
kind of more
more care.
important.
But a little bit. They're a little bit. They're more important. The cases that we do, because we have the resources, we do find ourselves obligated to take more care with the cases. Like, we don't just charge cases willy nilly.
Okay.
It's because we have taken a lot of time to ensure that we have the evidence, and we believe that this is the right person to charge with the right crime, because we believe that we have the evidence to show beyond a reasonable doubt that
Right.
that person did that crime, and that it violates this particular federal law. And so, since we have the time and the resources to make sure that we're getting these decisions right, it I think it helps sort of in knowing that, like in terms of the satisfaction and the passion that I have, is that they are, these are important things, that these are bad things that are happening, and that it's important that this enforcement happen, and that we can, that justice is pursued in these
Yeah.
particular cases.
Yeah.
So it's not hard to find um, yourself, emotionally or passionately attached to a particular case.
Mhm.
Um, I thankfully have not gotten to a point or had to do any particular types of cases where I felt like I was too emotionally involved that I couldn't.
Hmm.
But I think that has probably a lot to do with the fact that there are certain types of cases that I just the way that our office is structured that I don't do. So, for
Okay.
example, I've never had to do like a child exploitation or like a child pornography case or a sexual assault against a child. So, and those and one of the reasons that we have certain people do that is because those are the types of cases where it can be too hard to detach yourself.
Yeah, that would be
Or they just can't.
impossible
I mean, there's some
for
people just
me.
cannot handle like,
Cannot handle that. I cannot handle
right, like
that.
looking at that evidence and
Yeah,
and having to
yeah,
deal with that and make an analysis and,
yeah.
present that at trial. And there are certain attorneys who are able to compartmentalize that and are able to do that and advocate passionately on behalf of those victims. And so those are the attorneys that do those sorts of cases. And I've never had to do those sort of cases, so I don't really know actually how I would react.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I'm sort of thankful because we have some really good attorneys who handle those cases in our office. I don't really have to find out.
Wow,
I'm
that's
very happy with
yeah,
getting to do
no, I
everything
mean,
else.
I almost feel like it could be a blessing too that you don't have to deal with those types of cases. And it's just unfortunate that those even cases exist. But
Yeah.
that's for another day. I got carried away in all of my questions. But what I also wanted to hear from you is, and I'm sure a lot of people are interested, as a AUSA, what is your day to day like, Alicia? Like, what do you do every day? You know, what does it look like? Are you in court every single day, or what is that like?
Well, when we're not in quarantine,
Oh,
the
yes.
normal
Oh, I
day
should mention we
would
are in quarantine, COVID-19 quarantine right now
right now.
during this
So
interview.
my day right now looks very different than it normally does. But
Well, what is a
normally,
normal day? Yeah, a normal day look
normal
like.
day is as I said, because we are more selective in our cases, we generally don't have as high a caseload. I mean, we definitely don't have as a high caseload as like a DA's office or a state attorney's office. So I'm generally not in court every day, but at least a couple of times a week.
Mhm.
On most days, I'll have a court hearing or two, and those can be initial appearances on new arrests. They can be guilty plea hearings. They can be sentencings. They can be violation of probation hearings, kind of detention hearings, kind of all sorts of different things.
Mhm.
And if I don't have court, sort of my day to day is I am either in my office, answering emails on the phone, drafting legal, responses and motions, or I'm talking to defense counsel or talking to agents. And so
Mhm.
a lot of times if I'm not in my office, I'll be at um, the agency offices of different agents that we work with. So the big ones that we work with a lot are the FBI, DEA,
Mhm. Mhm.
ATF.
Oh gosh, you make it sound so awesome. I'm like, yes.
um, so because we always are multitasking. So I always have cases that are in court. So for example, I go to court for those cases. I have cases that are just investigations. So there
Mhm.
hasn't been a charging document filed yet. So we haven't charged anyone, but we're trying to figure out who or what crime potentially has happened, who to charge for it, and gathering evidence and trying to figure out if there should be any charges brought. And so a lot of times in that stage, the work where we work really closely with the agents as they're investigating the case and assisting them in doing various stages of that. And so a lot of times a lot of my day on those cases are, talking with agents either over the phone, over email, or meeting them, in person and looking at
Mhm.
evidence and things like
Oh, okay. That's not what I imagined. Because like
that.
I said, I watched a lot of TV.
Yeah. It's,
Is it similar?
no,
As like no,
no.
okay, no, it's not similar,
Yes, my
but it's
life is not
better.
like
I'm
Law and
sure.
Order.
I'm sure it's
And
better.
it's definitely not like NCIS or
Okay,
or CSI or any of
good
those.
to
Yes, I
know.
actually work with NCIS on cases, and life
It's
is
not like
not
that.
like that for any of us.
That's so funny. Oh my goodness. So, um, Alicia, can you tell me, Do you like what you do?
I do, which is
Yeah.
why I do it. For me, that was very important, as you sort of could tell, that I enjoy what I'm doing.
Mhm.
So, that was even, not only just like being a lawyer and ending up as the kind of lawyer I have become, but it was has always been very important to me to enjoy the process as well.
Mm.
So you had asked, like, did I regret have knowing now that I was going to end up in law and end up on this career path, having majored in music in undergrad, and I don't at all, because that's
Mhm.
what I wanted to do at that time,
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
really enjoyed my experience at Oberlin. And learning the things I got to learn and taking the classes I got to take and the internships and the experiences that I got. And same thing with law school. A lot of my friends were very miserable in law school because it is. I mean, it's as I said, it's school. So if you have a hard time with school, you will
Right.
have a hard time with law school.
Right.
And I thankfully always loved school.
Yeah.
And even though by the end of law school, I was very much done with school. I never wanted to go back to school again, because it's a long time to be in school.
Right.
But I also really enjoyed my experience in law school because it was what I made of it. I knew going in that it was sort of the same as undergrad, is that, I'd kind of figured out, sort of halfway through undergrad, okay, like this is my major and I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but I know that this is not like the end goal for
Mhm.
me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I'm going to enjoy, and get what experiences I can out of it while I can.
Mhm.
And so I sort of took that same approach to law school, is that I knew at the end of 3 years, I'm going to have to take a bar exam and get a job.
Right.
But a lot of what I had heard from other people is that the 3 years you have in law school, um, none of that, all that gets thrown out the door anyway when you have to study for the bar, because you have to sort of relearn, you have to learn what you need for the bar, and you're going to have to
Right.
cram all that information into your brain during that summer while you're studying anyway. And so you just need to graduate law school. You have to take
Yes.
your required classes and then take your other classes to fill up your 3 years. So that's what I did. A lot of people took classes they didn't really want to because they thought it might help them with a bar
Mhm.
exam, sort of later on down the road. But I took classes I wanted to take, and I took classes that I thought would be fun and interesting. And even though they
Yeah.
wouldn't eventually end up being where I was, the kind of law I was going to practice, or didn't end up being a subject on a bar exam or anything like that. I did it because, I wanted that educational experience. I knew I had 3 more years in school and that I probably wasn't going to be going back to school after that.
Right.
So I wanted to take advantage, but I wasn't going to work myself to death, and I wasn't going to study, for 12 hours a day. And
Right.
like,
Right.
I had friends who were like in the library at 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, I didn't want to be that person.
Right.
So I wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Well,
enjoyed the process. Like knowing I wanted to, I was doing it because I wanted to be a lawyer,
mhm. Mhm.
but I made sure to enjoy what I was doing at that time. And so I did. I really, and people, I mean, to this day, my friends from law school, like they have like PTSD from it,
Oh
and they think I'm
gosh.
crazy that I like can talk about my law school experience with such fondness and and
No, I
joy.
mean,
And
what
you're
I
never
mean,
like, did we go to the same school? They
but
say that to me.
But I also feel like, you had the right approach. I think that's great advice for not just being a lawyer, but for anything.
Yeah.
Enjoy the process of doing what you want to do, knowing that it's going to eventually get you where you want to be too. I mean, obviously you put the work in, you planned and did what you needed to do to get where you are, but enjoying the process. I mean, life's too short. You
Yeah.
got to just enjoy it. That's wonderful. Is there something about your job that you just don't like? Are you allowed to share this part? I don't know.
There's really very little. Honestly, I'm very blessed that not only I landed the job that I want. I've basically always wanted since I kind of figured out in the middle of law school that I definitely wanted to be a prosecutor. This
Mhm.
is what I've always wanted to do. So and being a prosecutor at a U.S. attorney's office, so at the federal level, is kind of the top, you know, is the top level, and
Mhm.
there's
Mhm.
nowhere else you can go in terms of
Yeah.
prosecution. So definitely, it's a great job. But not only that, I love the office that I'm in. Not only sort of where I live, even though I like I said, never been to Pensacola before, never lived in the South before. Because for those that aren't too familiar with the geography, even though I live in Florida, this is not, or
It's
like where I
not.
live is not Orlando, it's not
No,
Miami.
it's
We
not.
are, I am 10 miles from the Alabama border. Like we
Yes.
are Southern Alabama, Southern Georgia here in the Panhandle. We're just the same as, Mobile and, um, those cities. So it's very southern here. So that was kind of an adjustment, but I love living here. I love
Uh-huh.
the office and the people I get to work with. So there is really just it's been really great. And the only sort of, if I had to pick something that I didn't like, is that unfortunately the one thing you do have to deal with when you work for a prosecutor's office is that because it's a government entity,
Mhm.
the head of your entity
Mhm.
is always going to be a political, either a politically elected position, like a lot of DAs, district attorneys, um, are elected,
Mhm.
or they're politically appointed. So every U.S. attorney is appointed by the president, conferred by the Senate. So every 4 years or so, for the
Oh.
most part, you get a change in leadership and you get changes in policies as a result of sort of trickling down. And so as much as you try not to make your job, and for the most part, my job isn't at all like political in consideration.
Okay.
But every so often, because
Right.
eventually at the top, as our grandpa always likes to say, the attorney general of the United States is technically like my boss's boss. So, because he's the head of the Department of Justice and I work for
Yes.
the Department of Justice. So there are times where politics gets involved
Mm.
at management levels and just sort of, the things that come with the bureaucracy and politics,
Sure, yes.
um, and inevitably seep down to us little peons here at the bottom of the government triangle. And so those are the only times where I don't always love that part of the
Right.
job, is because when you're sort of beholden to policies that um, and changes, that things that happen purely because of politics that are happening.
Mhm, mhm.
That's all of a sudden, the winds change and you have different priorities given from on high, and you kind of just want to keep doing your job and keep
Yeah,
prosecuting
yeah.
crimes.
No,
And
definitely,
you have to do
definitely.
different things to sort of please the higher ups,
Yeah.
for political reasons. But thankfully, as again, sort of being on what we call the line, since I'm not in supervision or anything like that, I'm not a supervisor or in management. I don't generally have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. It just
That's
kind of
good.
pops up every, like I said, 4 years or so.
Right. I'm sure when it's coming, you're like, "Oh," everyone's tense in
Yes,
the
there's
office
always
stuff.
yes, there's always sort
Yeah.
of that change
Tension, yeah.
as leadership changes.
Of course.
Because generally speaking, leadership changes when the president changes. So
Yes. Oh man, stressful. But I'm
yeah.
really glad to hear that you have had such a great experience up until now. Um, I am curious, is there any continuing education that is needed as a AUSA?
Yes, so all lawyers,
Uh-huh.
except for I think Maryland and maybe some other states. It's dependent on what bar you have a state license in,
Mhm.
but most states require you to do continuing legal education. So just
Oh,
like I think teachers have to do the same thing, doctors have to do continuing medical
okay.
education. I think accountants, a lot of different professionals that have licenses have a requirement to do a certain number of hours per year. So in my case, since I still hold my license in the state of Colorado, every 3 years I have to do a certain number of hours of continuing
Oh,
legal
okay.
education, and
I
so
see.
that just means attending seminars, watching training videos, that kind of thing.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. Well, before we end our time together, I was curious also if there's any advice maybe that you have for people that are thinking about going into law or being a lawyer. Anything you'd like to share?
I would say my advice is, and again, I think this is just sort of my general approach to life. Um, But I would say if you do it, go into law if you want to go into law. Don't do it because of your parents or
Yeah.
because you think you're going to make a lot of money, because that's not really true. That's a big myth. Most lawyers don't make a lot of money. There's just a small amount of lawyers who make a lot of money. So it makes the
Yeah.
average look really high. But
Yeah.
the reality is that it's a lot of hard work,
Oh gosh.
regardless of what kind of law you go into. And I mean, are you making more money than as sanitation worker, yes, but I mean, you also had to pay a lot more money and do a lot more work and get into a lot more debt in order to do that. So you have to really decide if you want to do it, and if you are, if you are going to really enjoy doing it. Because I knew a lot of people through law school and who graduated from law school who were very miserable because they did, they got into law for, either the prestige or the money, and that in the end is not what's going to, I think, bring you a fulfilling life or make you happy. So do it if you want to do it.
Yeah.
And if
Oh
you think you're gonna
man,
enjoy
that is honest advice right here on When I Grow Up. Only here on When I Grow Up, you get honesty. Don't do it for the money, people. Do it because you want to do it. That's some really sound advice. Thanks so much for your time, Alicia. I really appreciated you getting into the details with me today. It's really great. And I want to encourage everybody. I don't know if I have all the answers, but if you have any more questions about law or wanting to be a lawyer, just anything that we talked about today, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll try to find the right people. Maybe Alicia can help us too on answering some of those questions. All right, guys, until next time, bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Alicia.